Good morning, everybody. It's Friday and it's HR Buzz. You might notice today I am not Jamie, so it's me, Verity, running the session today. So hello. This is episode 16 we're on, and today's topic is human sustainability. Are we burning out the workforce that we are trying to create? So this is a really big topic, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome two guests today who just have some on this particular topic. So I've got Lynsey and Dr. Paul. So Lynsey Kitching and Dr. Paul. I'll do your intros shortly. We are talking about this topic in particular because last week on Thursday we were at the Erupt in Birmingham. Both of you guys were there as well. And this was the pitch that you did, Lynsey. We asked people to do a 2-minute pitch or 90-second pitch, and you talked about this. It's a really hot topic at the moment, and I know you've written about this on LinkedIn, so it seemed absolutely natural to invite you on today. So let me do your intros formally, and then we can just hop on into the chat. So Lynsey Kitching. Lynsey, you're co-founder of Cape People Development and an expert in conversation-led leadership, generally working with founders, leaders and teams to build clarity, confidence and capability through everyday leadership conversations. I know you started off in corporate property, very different, before going into comms and organisational change. And you've seen how people navigate sort of complexity and uncertainty. She's got a postgrad qualification in organisational leadership from Oxford University Saïd Business School, and co-author of a book, which I think is coming really, really soon. So we'll talk about that in a little while as well. She's very passionate about developing people. And I'm just really thrilled that you can join us today. We're an expert on our topic. So hello, Lynsey.
Thank you.
And Paul, of course, we know and love the wonderful Dr. Paul Jones. Paul is an Associate Dean for Education and Student Experience at Aston University in Birmingham, a teaching fellow in Human Resources and Workplace Psychology. That's a really long title to fit on any desk.
Longest ever.
You've worked in public, private, third sector, people-focused roles, including things like recruitment careers, organisational development, business psychology, consultancy, and last 15 years in higher education, looking at employability, research and leadership development. There's loads of other things you do, and I know AI is a really big thing for you and in the workplace. So again, we can kind of delve into that. Have I done you proud with those wonderful bios? I feel like I've got such experts with
excellent work, Verity.
Oh, thank you very much. So let's just bin into this discussion because, like I said, this is something that you were talking about, Lynsey, and it's one of those things that you're kind of starting to hear a lot of, particularly in the wake of the boom in AI. So let's just ask then, Lynsey, from your work with leaders and organisations, do you think that workplaces are becoming kind of unsustainable for people? And if so, like why, what's happening?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why I guess I stood up to do the 90-second pitch last week and why I end up bringing this into so many conversations that I'm having at the moment is because of what I'm hearing from leaders, from organisations, and it sort of all accumulates under this banner of human sustainability. And I think what we are hearing and seeing is that people as a whole maybe are coping rather than thriving at work. Leaders have got more tensions than ever to manage. There's complexity inside our workplaces, as well as lots of complexity and uncertainty outside of our workplaces and in life in general. And so I think this accumulates as to what does it mean to be human, and how do we work in a human way when we have all of these aspects happening around us.
Yeah, well, it's just funny that we have to actually have the word human inserted into things. I think that in itself speaks volumes, doesn't it, about how things have shifted. So that leads me to you, Paul. From your point of view then, obviously you work very much with students and people and workplace psychology, but similarly, I know AI is a really big thing for you. So how do you see that in terms of human sustainability?
I was really glad that Lindsay stepped up last week, because I think it's a really important issue. So one of the things I know at the moment is writing about well-being for a book, but it's one of the things I've been involved in for quite a long time, and how we look after people in the workplace as a work psychologist is really important. I keep seeing over and over again, whoever I talk to, people feeling stressed or being overworked. There's loads of things to break down in terms of the greater side of human sustainability, but particularly ideas about how we design work, how we can try and approach the way to manage work in the workplace. We can't just keep tipping in onto people the type of jobs you wanted to do, because everyone's got a finite amount of time and ability and energy to do stuff then. So I'll probably use a candle analogy later in terms of how I see people, and there's also a nightclub-based analogy of one in, one out, which I'd like to talk about as well, which is about how if we're going to bring more tasks into someone's role, what ones are we getting rid of well then to be able to manage that, find amount of work that anyone can do then.
Well, it does seem to me that it's very much so a situation where, when you look at the stats, I did write some down actually. We've got 77% of frontline workers reporting feeling burnt out at work. These are all 2025 studies. 57% of workers, they're overwhelmed by admin tasks. Nearly half considered quitting due to workload pressure. We know these stats are nothing new, but they seem to have ramped up massively in the last few years. So just if we were to define human sustainability, for anybody who might not know exactly what we're talking about, Lindsay, how would we do that?
Yeah, so human sustainability was a term introduced by Deloitte a few years ago, and it's all about the concept of that as organisations, we give more back to our employees than we take from them. So this isn't about extracting, energy. It's about how do we give energy back in terms of what that might look like around well-being, but also how do we make people employable even when they've left our organisation. And really this extends to not just our employees, but our supply chain that we work with too, which traditionally we might not have treated in the same way as we treat our employees, and then the knock-on impact to society as a whole. So Deloitte really describes it as the degree to which organisations create value for people as human beings through well-being, skills, employability, equity, and opportunity. So this is a shift from not just organisations providing economic value, but providing value for humans.
Okay, so I think when you're looking at that, is that the same way you see it, Paul? I know if you bring in the AI angle as well, how would you describe
There's
that?
2 bits from me here, so it's really good to hear the Deloitte description of it.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this morning, because for me it goes down to us as human beings. We've all got a finite amount of energy and time on the planet. We're all like a candle, burning away at different times. What we do in the workplace can affect us in terms of how quickly we burn, and all these different things about how we get managed, what excites us, what we do to look after ourselves, how much work's thrown our way. But the important part for me as well is an expectation of organizations, almost like work should be the most important things in everybody's life. For me, that's completely wrong. And it needs to be the other way around, is that what we get from life, the meaning we place on it, should be the most important thing. So if we go back to the idea of a candle, and that we're always burning out and using the energy, we get to choose as human beings where we illuminate different things with that candle in. And I certainly don't want it to be all about work. I want it to be the other things in life. I want to shed some light on that in terms of what brings me joy, what motivates me, the things I can look back on when I'm older saying, I've used my life really well. And that's not about slaving away for different jobs or different organizations. That's about all the other wonderful things you can do within your life to really bring meaning to it then.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I was just going to say, to add to that, it's that shift, isn't it, as we've moved through work from the industrial ages, where work was very different, to the knowledge economy, where it was about knowing, to actually what do people want from work now around connection and purpose, and connecting not just minds but hearts too. So yeah, I love how Paul described that there.
Candle. I've just had a comment through from Jamie, who we know Jamie was meant to be here today, so I know he's been interested in talking about this topic. So it was a bit long to put on there. And Jamie, so I'm going to read it out. Is it fair to put all the blame on work? The reality of modern life is that life in general has become incredibly fast-paced and hectic. is it possible that employers are unfairly bearing the brunt of the blame? If our personal lives were easier and less chaotic, would we actually be able to cope just fine with all the pressure of the world of work? Are we being too myopic in our thinking around this? He would love to hear your thoughts on that. Either of you.
Lynsey, do you want to go first? I've got lots of opinions on this.
Yeah, I think it's our ecosystem as a whole, isn't it? I think, it's life as a whole, which organisations are a big part of that. And we work something like 80,000 hours on average across a lifetime. So that is a huge amount of time that work contributes to how we do things, people that we spend time with, the way that we organise our lives. So I think work is a huge contributing central factor to it. Yeah, we can't get away from that.
What about you, Paul?
I think for me, there's two parties here, isn't there? There's the organizational work, and then there's the person. And I don't like to think of work-life balance as such like a weighing scale, but more like a Venn diagram of where they overlap and find different ways to work then. But for me, organizations have to take some responsibility for this, to not just keep pouring into the vessels that we are at the workplace and just expecting us to cope with all the extra stuff they want to pour in. But also we have to take some ownership of saying where are our personal boundaries? How do we manage our lives then to make sure we can say no to things? One of the things I've had to cope with in life is I've always had the desire to do well, to do a good job in the jobs I'm doing, and that drives me always to do extra hours. But I have to try and limit that because there are other things I want to do in life then, and being able to define what your boundaries are, being able to push back and say no to things, or asking management which one of these priorities do you want to focus on? Because one of the things I wrote down earlier was, when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So how do you find the right balance then? And it goes back to the nightclub analogy I mentioned briefly earlier. We can't just keep lumbering things onto people with 5-page job descriptions expecting all these things to be done. There's got to be some prioritization, and those things which are adding the least value, they have to drop off. And for those things to happen, it has to be a combination of the person giving feedback to the organization, but the organization listening as well in terms of the feedback from people. And I don't see that happen as well sometimes in terms of that combination to make things better.
I was just going to say, do you think this is kind of more of a white collar worker issue that we're talking about here? Because I mean, let's say somebody who's got a degree, they're educated and they've got perhaps more choice in terms of what work they do. They may well have more of a voice, but similarly, they're also trying to climb the ladder. So they're likely to do overtime, try and get themselves up and potentially burn out in the process. And then you've got your blue collar workers who go in, clock out. But though, we've got 0 hours contracts, we've got all kinds of things that we're trying to, sort of deal with. So is it a sort of two-pronged problem? Are we finding that, in your work, Lynsey, you're finding that employers within that sort of those demographics, working with those demographics in comparison to C-suite, they're very different, I can imagine. But are they all part of this burnout? Is everybody experiencing it?
So I think burnout is one thing, but I think I'd like to widen up when we talk about human sustainability to not just about burnout and well-being, but actually to employability and opportunity and skill. Because what we're talking about when we think about sustainability is that sustainable work and sustainable opportunity for all as the world is changing. And so when you think about frontline workers, or you think about entry roles into to work, and you think about changes in terms of technology, think about changes in terms of conditions, changes in terms of the rising cost, and wages not raising in alignment with that. That's where we've got all of this complexity and all of this tension. So we know that some of our most caring professions are the ones where perhaps they don't have financial compensation that is comparative to perhaps some of those other roles that you were talking about there, Verity. But the challenge is how do we as organisations and as the ecosystem around it think in a way that is strategic about this? So I was at an event yesterday, a Chamber of Commerce event, which was focused in on skills, and one of the things that came out of the quarterly survey was that investment into training from organisations in the region has dropped down to levels that were last at this level in 2021. So if organisations aren't investing in training, if they're not creating spaces for conversations to happen, regardless of whether you're frontline workers, blue collar workers or not, then I think that's the gap here. But then we will see that there will be, bigger impacts on people's well-being, but also bigger impacts in terms of employment, and also in terms of what that means for people coming out of school as well, in terms of how they, get on the career ladder.
It's going to have a huge impact. And I think one of the things when you're talking about skills and employability and that, I'm bringing up AI again because I think this is something we have to bring into the discussion. So Paul, I'm aiming this at you. We know there's tools out there that can help people be more productive, and let's just talk about that in a general sense, not job specific. Are we at the point now where we have to include that in employability and skills, because we know that's a way to make us more productive and potentially offset some of the stress and things that like an individual might have trying to get stuff done, and also boost bottom line productivity and all that kind of thing? What's your take on that? Because like I said, I know you're a really keen advocate of AI in the workplace.
People's opinions differ massively in terms of what they think about AI at the moment. So I wrote a piece recently for the conversation about reasons why people hate AI, and there's lots of reasons why people might dislike it. I love AI tools. I love what they can do, both in terms of effectiveness, but also the growth potential for people. So the way I see myself and AI interacting is a bit like a double helix you get in DNA, where both me and the AI work in combination to make us both better, so greater than the sum of the parts then. So I find it really useful in that way. My biggest worry is, or one thing first, I think AI is going to be here to stay. The way it gets used, the way it gets embedded, that's not going anywhere. The way we refine it, the way we try and use it ethically, what we do with it, that will change, but it's not going to go away. But for me, the biggest risk, and going back to the human sustainability angle for this, is what I don't want to see happen is organizations using AI as a way to get rid of more staff that's based on efficiency, and all of a sudden they are still burning out staff and not treating staff in the right way or not developing them, but they've managed to reduce the staff number just using AI tools. For me, in the way I use AI, and I think the best way to use it is, it opens up more space for people to be the best versions of humans in the workplace, to be more reflective, reflexive, to be able to think about their jobs more effectively, and to raise organizations up to another level to improve the organization, not just as a way to cut costs and make things efficient then. So I think that's why I see the worry, but also the opportunity in terms of how we use these tools then.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I just had a comment through from Sam. Do we have any data or feedback from businesses who've trialed 4-day weeks? Now, we know this is something that's coming in, and we know that certain places like councils and things like that have tried this. Anybody have any thoughts on that one?
Paul, do you want to go from your university?
So there is some bits of research you've done. From a personal perspective, though, I think that we all find different ways to work optimally across a week. And sometimes you go into the office, and I know when I work at home, I'm a lot more productive when I'm being at home. So there's thoughts about the 4-day week, but also thoughts about how we organize and design work as well then. What's the right type to be able to get the best out of people? There's organizations having days they don't have any meetings, for instance. As I've counted up the number of meetings I have in a week, and there's an awful lot of meetings, and I don't think that many of them sometimes are that productive then. So how do we reorganize the way we communicate with others in the workplace, the way we design work effectively? We quite often try and put stuff into jobs without really thinking about the design element. There's just more tasks to do. And we're certainly not very good sometimes of asking questions about, are all the things we do and adding value? And if you had a value hierarchy of all the things you're doing in your job, those things at the bottom are probably not adding much value, so they could probably just drop off then. So I think 4-day weeks is what we were always promised back in the days of Tomorrow's World, years and years ago, when technology was improving.
The French do it.
Yeah, and I'd love to see us get towards that. If I could, I'd do a 3-day week. Sorry, if I
2-day
could,
week.
I'd be rich and I'd just bounce about doing lots of things I want to do, but that's not the case at the moment. But I think there's better ways we can organize work and better ways we can design work to make that possibility even getting better than 4 days then.
And Lynsey, what about you? Are you hearing this chat in leadership conversations, or is it kind of like, nah, we don't want to go down that route at all?
No, I think it varies. And, whether we're talking about 4-day week or hybrid working, what we tend to do, and it's a very human response, isn't it, to go to fix with a solution before we've actually looked at this at a, more strategic level, I guess. And what I certainly, encourage the people that we work with to do is to think about what's your overall business strategy? What are you trying to achieve as an organisation? And then let's design how we work to align with that, and let's design how we want to support our people in line with that too. So very often people don't have a people strategy that actually fully aligns with their business strategy. They might choose initiatives of saying, you know what, let's do 4-day week, let's put in an incentive around X, or let's do this thing, and they're sort of helpful, but actually often don't have the impact.
They're not connected or aligned.
And they're not connected. And I think that's what we're talking about. If we really want to think about human sustainability in the same way as we've moved to think about environmental sustainability, it's having a plan and a strategy that aligns with your organisation, that you can measure, that has tangible actions, and that you can clearly see is making a difference for people. And, as I said, people in your organisation, but also then people in wider society.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's something that we need to see people doing more of. I've just had another comment through here from Phoebe. Do you think that businesses need to adapt to neurodiversity in terms of sustainability, as people with autism, ADHD and similar may burn out faster than their neurotypical colleagues? I don't know any of the figures around that. Do either of you know anything? Can you respond to this for Phoebe? Thanks, Phoebe.
I don't know the figures, but I was about to say something anyway that ties into this. So I think the question posed is really important. For me, and it goes a little bit against what Lynsey was saying, I think the strategy side is really important, but also what gets missed is the individual in these processes sometimes. So it's not like this big human sustainability net you can throw it and everyone's covered by these things. And strategies sometimes are quite guilty of that as well. And what I'd like to see is a balance between the strategy being aligned, but going back to the question there, that individuals are taken into account. So it's not just about neurodiversity.
And it's not just grouping everything.
Yeah, every single person is different in some way, a different set of personal circumstances, a different set of skills, abilities, wants, needs, motivations, desires. I'm not saying that we should do a full psychological profile for every single person and sit down every single day to understand exactly what's going on. But there's got to be more the individual. So the neurodiverse aspects, but the individual aspects, that's what's really important is how do we get the best of the people, but how do we protect them as well to make sure we're not having an adverse effect on them. If we crack that, workplaces will be a lot better.
And that's where, I think we have to have both. So I think we have to have a strategy. It has to be talked about and, how we run our organisations. But I completely agree. What then has to run alongside of it, and the thing that, at CAPE that we talk about all the time, is everyday conversations. And actually inclusivity and equity for all happens through conversations about really understanding each other, doesn't it? And that, not making assumptions about what's right for one person being right for the other, but actually taking time to connect and have meaningful conversations. And that's what we find that we're losing in workplaces, where there is tension and where there is overwhelm, and managers and leaders end up firefighting and reacting, not being able to take the time to understand how somebody how can they help somebody do their best at work, whether that's somebody who is neurodiverse or anybody that's just got different preferences in terms of the way of working.
Well, what about, sorry, I was just going to say, if that's the case, you're talking about all these different approaches and streamlining them. Who's responsible for this? Who's taking on this as the task? Is this leaders in their conversations? Because these all need to be actioned. They need to, come down. They need to actually appear. It's nice to be theoretical and talk about everything. How is that happening? How are we seeing it play out actually in the workforce? Or how should it play out?
Yeah.
For me, it's a collective responsibility. Everyone's got to play a part in this. We're all actors in these different productions in different organizations of how things act then. So there was some terms I come across lately. So we talk about psychological safety quite a bit in the workplace.
Yeah.
There's another term I was reading about recently, which is psychological agency. So not just about creating a space where people feel it's okay to actually talk about stuff, but actually giving them the empowerment to actually do things in the right way then. So creating a space where people can feel heard. It's not just giving the space to talk. They feel heard, that there's actions happening in the organization, but also they can feel empowered to do things themselves. So at every level, whether it's the C-suite, whether it's middle management, whether it's the individual, there's a collective responsibility to want to find the best way to work and to try and use the individual to push back in some ways and have open, honest conversations, for middle management to push both ways and do things. But all of us have a collective responsibility. The example Lynsey was talking about there, Lynsey used the word equity. I love equity, but what happens is equity becomes a bit of a buzzword, but doesn't really impact sometimes in organizations. So people still treat it as equality and think if we treat everybody the same, then we're doing our job then. That's not the way you get the best out of people then. So they're having conversations about these things, unpacking them, making them real for people in the workplace. That's where I see some real value then, but at all levels of the organization.
And Lynsey?
Yeah,
with that?
Yeah, completely. It's getting back to what makes us human, which is how we connect on that human to human level. So how do we spend time asking questions? And really, I think the biggest superpower that us as humanity has, and the one that we can grow and help, our next generation grow, is curiosity. If we ask more questions and we stopped and paused before jumping in and telling and assuming, that would make such a huge difference. And so everybody has the ability to start to do that, whether it's just in a meeting setting like Paul was describing, around how do we get people to have agency, rather than just as a very simple thing going, has anybody got any questions or anybody got any ideas, where you get the tumbleweed and you might get somebody confident and extrovert jump in, but the quiet, thoughtful voices that have something to say might struggle. Is, let's ask a question in advance of the meeting to let everybody think about it. Let's, people, give them the opportunity to write it down as well as, shout it out. And let's ask questions that really mean that we want a response, and we want we've allowed time for a response here as well. So really simple changes can start from that grassroots level of helping people feel like they do have the ability to contribute, they will be listened to, and there's lots of ways that we can help people do more of that.
I think on that point, so listening is difficult as a term for me because it implies you just listen in one way then. So when I was writing about this earlier, I prefer thinking about tuning in, which allows you to think about different ways to gather information, because there's so many ways we can be able to tune into the organization, to notice behaviors, to understand what people are going through. Not relying on email like a lot of organizations seem to do, or having to fill in questionnaires. It could be meetings, it could be different conversations, it could be different ways to gather information, or just noticing what's going on in the workplace, but bringing all those different bits of data together to actually tune into what's going on then.
I was just going to ask you both then, we were talking about employability, and I was going to say, what can leaders do now to make people more employable? But actually, Paul, you're coming from an academic and institutional side of things. Are we preparing people who are leaving, our graduates going into the workforce with the employability skills that, Lynsey, you're talking about we need to, it's kind of like the synergy between the two, right? You need to have the right skills coming into the workforce. I had a really big response there from Jamie, which is going to be in the comments. I can't put it on screen. And he's talking about the fact that the next generations are very much going to be technology and data driven young people who just live and breathe AI, and it's not going to be an issue. So how are we going to make sure that people are now employable, and the new people coming in, and what can organizations do as well, leaders do, to just ensure that carries on? I know it's kind of a big question. So like from an academic point of view, Paul, what are universities doing to ensure that, courses or whatever it might be? And then Lynsey, from the workplace point of view.
There's a couple of points there. I think that I'm not convinced the whole education system, right from primary school through to how we put people through to higher education works coherently to match, to have a single thread of what we're trying to get people to do then.
Yeah.
So one of the big things I like to think about recently is more the philosophy side about what does life mean, what kind of tools we give for people to actually self-reflect and decide what's good for them then. But that's been lost to a certain extent for a lot of us in terms of how we can place meaning in the lives we lead. So I would completely scrap a lot of what we do education-wise and redesign things a great deal. So one of the things I do in my spare time is think if I could had unlimited money to redesign education, what would I make that look like? And I think it's a really interesting thought experiment then, because we are limited by funds and classroom sizes and different things. I'm lucky I work for an institution that really values employability. We've got a very good placement here for undergrads. We've built employability into the key way we do things. And I think it's being mentioned a lot in terms of higher education, but that translation of what universities are at the moment and what they've been historically and how that looks in the future, that's up for debate, because higher education is under massive pressure in terms of numbers, how we get students through, how we are fighting for our place in an ecosystem, and how we have to charge students different amounts of money for these things. I think there's lots to unpack there. I think people are doing their best trying skill people up for the future and making them more employable. There's always a tension between skills and how we develop skills in the classroom versus getting people to think critically and the thoughts and knowledge that we want to give them as well, and how that translates to the real world then. And it's very hard to be able to do that unless the whole system works together.
Yeah.
So by the time they get their education, you're fine-tuning someone's already very well developed.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's what happens at the moment.
Same for you then, Lynsey. How, in the organisations people coming in and existing employees, how are we ensuring that they've got those skills to be developed, sort of internal mobility, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think the easiest part of development is developing knowledge. And that's why we tend to see that many people on their development plans, the people that we work with, have go on a course, go on some training. And what happens in a lot of those instances is that you have a great day, or sometimes 6 days, you're involved in it, you come back to the workplace and it's difficult to put in place, or you forget a lot of it. And there's statistics out there about how much actually we take forward from knowledge-based training. What we know is that adults learn through experience. And we've been doing a lot about vertical development lately in terms of understanding. And there's a beautiful phrase that Alice, who runs the Vertical Development Institute, has, which is, it's how grown-ups grow up. We learn through experiences, and we learn from those points where we feel stretched, we feel uncomfortable, and we have a choice in those moments around what do we do? Do we push through and learn through the experience and grow, or do we stay where we are? And so what really makes the difference with organisations that we see are growing their humans, if you want to call it this, and also growing their performance. This is business success we're talking about here. It's not just like idealistic, fluffy stuff. This really impacts, how innovative and successful businesses are. What they're doing is they're making time, again, for conversations to say, what just happened there? What did you learn from it? What do you know about yourself, and what are you going to take forward and do differently? Again, really simple questions, but in that moment that often takes just a few minutes, it's a learning experience that then really shifts that individual. And that's what we mean by, they can take that forward into whatever role that they go on to next, or if they stay in that organisation. And I think, alongside the technical, the skills knowledge, that part of it, we've got to be supporting people to learn and reflect and grow as well.
That ties in nicely with Mark's question there. If leaders listening to this and thinking, I don't have time for more conversations, what would you say to them?
I think this is where it goes back to redesigning the work that we do. And actually, the work of leaders are conversations. That's what we are here to do, as leaders, is to create the environment for people to do their best work. And we do that through connecting, providing clarity, helping them problem solve, helping them develop and grow, and where needed, to having conversations about performance. That is the work.
Yeah.
But I know that, I'll be coaching somebody and they say, oh, I was talking to people all day, so I've got to do my job now of an evening. And that's around what Paul was saying, is that, this isn't about giving people more. It's about redefining roles and redefining work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we've covered quite a lot here, so I'm going to wrap up shortly, but I've got one final question. So if there's one thing organisations, HR, whoever, leaders, could start doing differently tomorrow in terms of employability, human sustainability, like all of those things we've discussed. Paul, what would you say? What one thing would you like to see organisations doing?
Goes a little bit back to the question that I was just asked about leadership and conversations. It's for organizations to realize the most important asset is the people within the organization. I don't think that happens enough in organizations sometimes, to realize that it's the people who will really drive success and it's their most important asset. So about realizing that and looking after those people to get the best out of them, but also making sure they're looked after and protected as much as possible as well. Then.
Yep, and same for you, Lynsey. What would you say to those leaders?
Yeah, I think it doesn't have to be this, when we think about a macro level, it feels hard to turn things around and to move things forward, but change can happen just in one conversation that you're having once a day. So, my sort of, ending point is, what's the one conversation that you might be avoiding that actually would have the biggest impact for you and the people that you work with? And how can you have that conversation?
Be courageous, have the conversations, guys. That's a really we've gone slightly over, but I think we had some really great questions from everybody. That's helped us kind of unpick this. It's such a big subject, right? And when you start thinking granularly, you go, oh well, you could do this, but you're right. I think it's making a change and seeing how the impact is, and it's not going to happen necessarily overnight. And obviously we're going to have lots of different things happening in terms of, just social impact and all those kinds of things. So I think this is a good start to get people talking. Just before we go then, is there anything you guys would like to tell us that you're doing? Lynsey, I'd love to hear about your book, and I know Paul's got his Substack. So just tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up.
Yeah, so we've put together everything that we've been talking about really over the last few years in how we work with people, our research, and the book is called Beyond Small Talk, and it's 5 conversations that change how you lead. And we wanted to make a really simple way for leaders to have these conversations. So it's a workbook, it's out in May, and we'd love to know what people think as we share it widely.
Well, I will actually link your talk from Disrupt, because I think you covered some of that. I'll put that in the comments so people can always go and have a little listen as a taster. No spoilers. They still need to go and get the book as well. Thank you, Lynsey. Thank you so much. And Paul, do you want to tell us? I've got a QR code for you, so I'm just going to pop that up if people want to have a little look. It's popped up on the side. Paul, go for it.
So I connect with you on LinkedIn if you want to see me post about relevant stuff that's related to this. I'm always happy to have new conversations. The Substack I've created is for me to express my writing in different ways, particularly from an organizational angle, but particularly about well-being and philosophy. And that ties in then to another Substack, which I'm editing, which is Business Research Impact, which is how we translate business management research, but into practical things that can help people and provoke them into thinking differently. And I've also got a book which will come out next year about well-being, but it's a satirical take on well-being using philosophical lenses to look at different aspects of well-being and to really critique deep down what happens then, because I'm fed up of seeing organizations use well-being as a plaster, but they're the ones creating the cuts in the first place. So I'm keen to be able to challenge those things then.
Oh, brilliant. I know that'll be good. You're a fantastic writer. I'm really looking forward to subscribing to that. I urge other people to do that as well. I've just popped up another QR code, the Benefit Brief, which is our own newsletter where we talk about lots of things. We put these videos in there. So if anybody would like to subscribe to that as well, obviously the QR code is there. So I'm going to just wrap up. We've got before we go, we've got next week, we have... next month, we've got some really interesting people lined up. Claire Foster from RAC is going to be here, and then we've got somebody else talking about AI again later on in the month, so we'll keep you posted about those. But I just want to say thank you both for your time this morning on a Friday, early Friday. If there's one thing I suppose I'd like us to take away from today, it's that human sustainability. It's not just well-being or 4-day weeks or anything like that, as we've sort of unpicked. It's about leadership and conversations and making sure that's where the change happens and filters down, and hopefully we'll see organisations benefiting, prospering, and things not shutting down for humans. We want to keep things going. Thank you both. Really hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and no doubt I'll see you both at events and things in the near future. So thanks everybody for joining in today and for all the questions, and we will see you all next month. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.